The grand lecture hall of the Galactic Confederation Strategic Academy gleamed with polished quantum crystal displays and curved holographic interfaces. 23 students from across the galaxy sat in tiered, semicircular rows, each representative of a different species that had earned their place through centuries of service to the Confederation. The massive chamber was built to accommodate beings of all physiologies, from the towering Taurid, with their silicon-based exoskeletons, to the floating Frisian gas forms that hovered in specially designated atmospheric chambers. In the center of the hall stood Colonel Zalavx, his 4 primary eyes scanning the room with practiced authority. His scaled skin glistened under the ambient light, and the ceremonial insignia of the 27th teaching cycle adorned his thoracic crest. For 27 standard cycles, he had shaped the minds of the Confederation's finest tactical officers. None had ever bested his final simulation. Today, Zalavx announced, his primary voice box resonating through the chamber. We begin advanced fleet tactics. Some of you have commanded actual vessels in border skirmishes. Others bring centuries of theoretical knowledge. His secondary eyes narrowed slightly. And some of you shouldn't be here at all. The colonel's gaze settled on the human female seated in the far corner of the 3rd tier. Maya Aaron, or Maya Watson, as she had been designated for Academy records, sat motionless, her eyes fixed on her data terminal. Unlike the other students with their neural enhancers, biomechanical interfaces, and sensory augmentations, she appeared jarringly primitive. Her skin was almost entirely bare, with only a small patch of brownish fur atop her head. At approximately 1.7 meters tall, her frame was fragile compared to most sentient species in the room. Our first lesson addresses the 3 critical vulnerabilities of the Johnny Battle formation, Zalavx continued, deliberately turning away from the human. Commander Thrick, your analysis. The Volurid student's tentacles rippled with confidence. The formation's primary weakness is flank exposure during the 3rd phase of deployment. Second, communications vulnerability when the formation stretches beyond standard subspace relay capacity. Third, energy consumption becomes unsustainable in engagements lasting beyond 7 standard hours. Correct, Zalavx nodded approvingly. These 3 weaknesses have been documented across 1,000 years of tactical analysis. He paused, then abruptly turned toward Maya. Miss Watson, do you have anything to add, or are humans unfamiliar with 13-dimensional fleet configurations? The lecture hall fell silent. All eyes, compound and otherwise, turned toward the human. Maya looked up from her terminal, her expression unnervingly calm. There's a 4th weakness, she said quietly. Time. Zalavx's dermal plates stiffened. Explain. The Johnny formation was designed for immediate tactical superiority, but it creates a predictable temporal pattern. Any enemy that survives the first 3 deployment phases can calculate the formation's future positions with 89% accuracy. The problem isn't just that it consumes too much energy after 7 hours. It's that by hour 5, an adaptive opponent can predict your movements 17 minutes in advance. Silence gripped the hall. Zalavx's outer membranes fluttered in surprise. This precise observation had been published in his most recent tactical journal, a supplementary note he'd added just before the academic cycle began. I see you've done some reading, Miss Watson, he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. Though I wonder if humans truly understand the difference between memorizing facts and comprehending 13-dimensional battle tactics. 27 standard days earlier, Zalavx had been summoned to the Academy Council chamber. Commander Pex, the Academy's supreme instructor, sat at the head of the crystalline table, flanked by 12 senior teaching officers. The Confederation Parliament has authorized Earth's observer status, Pex announced, without preamble. As part of the diplomatic initiative, we're required to accept 1 human student into the Advanced Strategic Program. Zalavx's secondary respiratory system hissed in disbelief. A Deathworlder in advanced tactics? They barely understand interplanetary travel, let alone the complexities of quantum-based fleet maneuvers. Nevertheless, Pex continued, Maya Aaron of Earth has been selected. She will be placed in your class, Colonel. My class? This is absurd. Humans are from a high-gravity, high-radiation death trap. Their minds are evolved for primitive survival, not sophisticated tactical analysis. They lack even basic neural enhancement technology. Commander Pex's crystalline eyes hardened. The decision has been made, Colonel. The human will join your class. I expect you to treat her with the same standards as any other student. A pause. Though I share your doubts about her ability to keep pace. Zalavx's mandibles clicked in reluctant acceptance. But inside, his resolve hardened. He would prove, through rigorous academic process, that Deathworlders had no place in the Confederation's elite tactical academy. Over the next 4 weeks, Maya Watson became an enigma that increasingly troubled Zalavs. Initially, she struggled with the 13-dimensional tactical visualizations. Her species had evolved in a mere 3 dimensions, after all. But her adaptation rate was unprecedented. While other students relied on neural enhancers and biochemical accelerants, the human used only her natural cognition, spending additional hours in the simulation chambers after formal instruction ended. During the 3rd week, students submitted their analysis of swarm tactics. Maya's paper proposed what she called coordinated microjumps, a distributed approach that contradicted centuries of established tactical doctrine. Zalavx graded it concerning and privately forwarded a copy to the Confederation Defense Command for analysis. During the 4th week's lecture on siege warfare, Zalavx deliberately called on Maya to explain the complex mathematics behind shield harmonics. Miss Watson, explain why the Gorn-Thresher equation fails at the event horizon of artificial singularities. Maya didn't hesitate. Because it assumes time flows uniformly across the engagement space. Near singularities, time dilation creates cascade failures in the shield matrix. The equation needs a 4th-order polynomial correction factor based on relativistic distortion. And who first proposed this correction? Zalavs pressed. You did, Colonel, in your dissertation. Temporal Considerations in Shield Harmonics, published 18 standard years ago. A pause. Though your correction factor has a rounding error in the 3rd decimal place. A ripple of astonishment passed through the classroom. Zalavx's outer membranes darkened slightly, the Threshian equivalent of a flush. A minor transcription error in the published version, he said stiffly. The original calculations were correct? That evening, Zalavx reviewed Maya's performance data in his private chambers. The human had no neural implants, used no biochemical enhancements, and yet was keeping pace with species whose civilizations had practiced space warfare for millennia. It defied explanation. His terminal chimed with an incoming communication from Defense Command. Admiral Krivix's holographic form materialized above the desk. Your assessment of the human's tactical proposal is concerning, the Admiral said without preamble. Is it flawed? Zalavx asked. Quite the opposite. Our simulations indicate her micro-jump strategy could be devastating against traditional defensive grids. It exploits weaknesses we hadn't considered. The Admiral's compound eyes narrowed. How much have you taught her about our defensive systems? Nothing beyond the standard curriculum, Zalavs replied. She seems to see patterns the rest of us miss. The Admiral's mandibles clicked nervously. Monitor her closely, Colonel. The Confederation is still debating the wisdom of sharing advanced tactical knowledge with Deathworlders. After the communication ended, Zalavx sat in contemplation. The final examination was approaching, a 3-day fleet simulation where each student commanded identical resources against his tactical AI. In 27 years, no student had ever defeated Zalavx's persona. The simulation had become legendary, a proving ground that separated true tacticians from mere theorists. If the human somehow succeeded, where all others had failed. Zalavex pushed the unsettling thought away. It was impossible. The simulation incorporated quantum randomization protocols specifically designed to prevent pattern recognition. No organic mind could predict its responses. The following day, Zalavex announced the final examination to his class. Each of you will command an identical mock fleet against a simulated defensive network. Your objective is to capture the Central Space Station while minimizing both your casualties and collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. The simulation will run for 3 standard days. His gaze swept the room. I should note that in 27 teaching cycles, no student has ever achieved victory against the defensive systems. The classroom buzzed with nervous anticipation. Only Maya remained still, her eyes revealing nothing. One final point, Zalavex added. The simulation incorporates quantum randomization. Attempting to identify patterns in the defensive responses is futile. Success requires mastery of established tactical doctrine. As the students filed out, Zalavex noticed Maya lingering at her terminal, reviewing data on gravitational topography, an obscure and rarely used aspect of fleet tactics. Curious, but ultimately irrelevant. The simulation's gravity wells were standardized and offered no tactical advantage. The examination began at dawn of the first day. 24 students entered individual simulation chambers, their consciousness linked to virtual command centers, controlling identical fleets of 30 warships. The simulation space, a complex star system with multiple planets, moons, asteroid fields, and the heavily defended Central Station, appeared before them in perfect 13-dimensional detail. From his master control room, Zalavex monitored all 24 simulations simultaneously. As expected, most students immediately began implementing traditional attack strategies, probing actions, feints, and measured advances to test the defensive network. By midday, 3 students had already lost their entire fleets to the adaptive defense grid. What Zalavex found puzzling was Maya Watson's complete inaction. Her fleet remained in the starting position, sensors active but weapons powered down. Hour after hour passed, and while other students engaged in increasingly desperate battles, the human simply observed. "What is she doing?" whispered Driss, Zalavex's teaching assistant. "Does she not understand the simulation parameters?" "Perhaps humans lack the cognitive capacity to process 13-dimensional warfare," Zalavex replied, though without his usual certainty. "Or perhaps she's formulating a strategy." By the end of the first day, 8 students had been eliminated, their fleets destroyed by the adaptive defenses. The remaining 15 were engaged in various stages of combat, some making marginal progress, others barely surviving. Only Maya's fleet remained untouched, still in its original formation at the edge of the system. "Should we check if her interface is functioning properly?" Driss suggested. "No," Zalavex decided. "Let her continue, whatever this is." The second day began with renewed attacks from the remaining students. The defensive network, true to its design, adapted to each approach, becoming increasingly efficient at countering the established tactics. By midday, 5 more students had been eliminated, their fleets reduced to virtual debris. It was during the afternoon of the second day that Maya finally began to move her ships. But rather than a coordinated attack, she split her fleet into small groups of 2 or 3 vessels each. These groups began executing seemingly random microjumps throughout the periphery of the system. Zalavex watched with growing fascination. The microjumps appeared chaotic, without any recognizable pattern. The defensive network largely ignored these small groups, classifying them as low-priority threats compared to the more direct assaults from other students. "What is she testing?" Driss asked, puzzled by the display. "I'm not certain," Zalavex admitted. "But the defense system is allowing those small groups to operate with minimal response. It's peculiar." Throughout the second day, Maya continued the strange dance of microjumps, her small ship clusters appearing and disappearing across the simulation space, Occasionally, a defensive unit would engage one of her groups, but the ships would immediately jump away, only to reappear elsewhere. By evening, only 8 students remained in the simulation. Maya's fleet was still intact, having suffered no losses despite hundreds of microjumps. Before the day ended, she recalled all her ships to the starting position. "She's gathering data," Zalavx suddenly realized, a cold sensation creeping through his neural pathways. "Testing response times, coverage patterns, prioritization algorithms." "But the quantum randomization," Driss began. "May not be as random as we believed," Zalavx finished, his voice barely audible. The third and final day began with tense anticipation. 7 students launched desperate attacks, knowing their time was running out. The defensive network, now fully adapted to their strategies, countered with brutal efficiency. Maya's approach, however, was something entirely new. She divided her fleet into 26 equal groups, launching them simultaneously in different vectors. Each group immediately began a complex series of coordinated microjumps, moving in what appeared to be completely random patterns. But Zalavx, watching with increasing alarm, recognized that the patterns weren't random at all. "She's mapped the entire gravitational topography of the simulation," he whispered in disbelief. "Those aren't random jumps. They're precisely calculated to create a gravitational resonance cascade." As if confirming his realization, the defensive network suddenly began registering hundreds of phantom targets. The carefully coordinated microjumps were creating subspace distortions that confused the targeting systems. Communication between defensive nodes became erratic as the gravitational resonance grew stronger. "Impossible," Driss breathed. "The simulation engine shouldn't allow this kind of manipulation." "She found a loophole," Zalavx replied, equal parts horrified and impressed. The quantum randomization protocols were designed to prevent pattern recognition in the defensive responses, but they don't prevent exploitation of the underlying physics engine. On the main display, they watched as Maya's 26 ship groups suddenly ceased their erratic jumps and formed a perfect advancing formation. The defensive network, still struggling with the gravitational distortions, failed to coordinate an effective response. Without firing a single shot, Maya's fleet slipped through the confused defensive perimeter and approached the central station. "Station Command. This is Fleet Commander Watson." Maya's calm voice echoed through the communication channel. "Your defensive grid is compromised. I can stabilize the gravitational field if you surrender the station immediately. Otherwise, the resonance cascade will continue to amplify, eventually affecting your structural integrity." The simulated station commander, following protocol when faced with an untenable situation, surrendered. The simulation ended with a success notification that had never been seen before in 27 years. Objective achieved. Casualties, 0%. Civilian infrastructure preservation, 100%. Tactical innovation score, maximum. Zalavx stared at the results in stunned silence. The human had defeated his simulation without firing a single shot, exploiting a fundamental aspect of physics that none of his previous students had ever considered. Within an hour, Zalavx was summoned to Commander Pex's office. The Academy's governing council was already assembled, their expressions ranging from concern to outright alarm. "Explain what happened," Pex demanded without preamble. Zalavx struggled to maintain his professional composure. "The human identified and exploited a characteristic of the simulation engine that we had not considered. She used precisely coordinated microjumps to create a gravitational resonance cascade that disrupted the defensive network's targeting and communication systems." "Could this work in actual combat?" Governor Venn asked, his crystalline appendages vibrating with concern. "Theoretically, yes," Zalavx admitted. "The principles are sound. In fact, in real space, the effect would likely be even more pronounced than in our simulation." The council chamber erupted in agitated discussion. Governor Call's voice rose above the others. This is precisely why sharing tactical knowledge with Deathworlders was ill-advised. They think differently. Dangerously. Not dangerously, Zalovs found himself saying, surprising even himself. Just differently. All eyes turned to him in surprise. Consider the approach, he continued. No casualties on either side. Complete preservation of civilian infrastructure. The human found a way to achieve the objective without destruction, something none of our previous tactical doctrines prioritized to this degree. A thoughtful silence fell over the chamber. Bring her in, Pex decided finally. I want to hear from the human directly. When Maya entered the council chamber, she showed no sign of triumph or nervousness. She stood before the assembled leaders with the same quiet composure she had maintained throughout the course term. Miss Watson, Pex began, your performance in the final simulation was unprecedented. Colonel Zalovx has explained the technique you employed. What we wish to know is, how did you conceive of this approach? Maya's gaze moved briefly to Zalovx before she answered. I observed that the simulation treated gravitational fields as actual physical phenomena, not just navigational obstacles. Once I confirmed this during the first day of observation, I spent the second day mapping the precise gravitational topology of the system. By the third day, I had enough data to calculate the resonance points. Why not simply attack directly? Governor Call asked. Your approach was needlessly complex. Direct attack guarantees casualties on both sides, Maya replied. The objective was to capture the station, not destroy it or its defenders. In warfare, victory with minimal loss of life should always be the priority. A very human perspective, Call noted, not entirely approvingly. Perhaps, Maya acknowledged, but an effective one. The debate in the Council of Governors lasted 3 days. Zalovx found himself in the unexpected position of advocating for the human's approach, arguing that the Confederation had become too rigid in its tactical thinking. We've been teaching the same doctrines for 1,000 years, he told the council. Maya Watson didn't break our rules. She showed us they were incomplete. In the end, the council reached a compromise. A new Joint Species Tactical Innovation Command would be established, with Maya Watson appointed as its first director and Colonel Zalovx as senior advisor. Together, they would explore new approaches to space warfare that emphasized efficiency and preservation rather than traditional force projection. A week after the council's decision, Maya found Zalovx in the Academy's observatory, staring out at the stars. I've been meaning to ask you something, she said, joining him by the transparent dome. What's that? Why did you wait so long to intervene in the simulation? You realized what I was doing during the second day, didn't you? Zalovex's mandibles clicked in the Threshian equivalent of a smile. I was curious to see how far you could take it. In 27 teaching cycles, no one had ever approached the problem from that angle. I wanted to know if it would actually work. And now you're stuck with me as a colleague, Maya said, a hint of humor in her voice. There are worse fates, Zalovx admitted. Though I'm still not convinced Deathworlders should be allowed unrestricted access to Confederation tactical databases. That's fair, Maya nodded. Trust has to be earned. But consider this. I didn't defeat your simulation because I'm human. I defeated it because I approached it without preconceptions. Sometimes the greatest advantage isn't strength or technology, but simply a fresh perspective. They stood in companionable silence, watching the distant stars. Zalovx found himself reconsidering many long-held beliefs. Perhaps humans weren't merely violent Deathworlders with primitive minds. Perhaps they were something far more interesting and potentially valuable. You know, he said finally, the Confederation has existed for 12,000 years. In that time, we've encountered hundreds of species, fought countless wars, developed technologies that can reshape planets and harness the power of stars. Yet in all that time, we never considered using gravitational resonance as a tactical tool. There's probably a lot more we haven't considered, Maya replied. That's why diversity of thought is so important. No single species, no matter how advanced, can think of everything. Zalavex nodded slowly. In my culture, there is a saying, the stars themselves teach new lessons to those who watch long enough. Perhaps it's time the Confederation learned some new lessons. As they turned to leave, Maya paused. By the way, I've been meaning to tell you, your lecture on shield harmonics was brilliant, despite that minor calculation error. Zalavex's membranes darkened slightly. There was no error. Third decimal place, fourth equation. You rounded when you should have truncated. That's... Zalavx began, then stopped. He quickly reviewed the equations in his mind and realized, with a mixture of annoyance and admiration, that she was right. I'll issue a correction in the next academic publication. I've already drafted it for you, Maya said, transmitting a file to his terminal. Consider it my way of saying thank you for not interfering with my strategy during the simulation. As she walked away, Zalavex found himself experiencing an unfamiliar emotion. It took him a moment to identify it as respect, genuine respect for a Deathworlder. The universe, it seemed, still had much to teach him. The formation of the Joint Species Tactical Innovation Command marked the beginning of a new era in Confederation military doctrine. Under Maya and Zalav's guidance, traditional tactics were re-examined and refined. The emphasis on minimizing casualties and preserving infrastructure, once dismissed as a human weakness, became increasingly central to Confederation strategy. Within 2 years, Maya's gravitational resonance technique had been incorporated into standard tactical training, along with several other innovations developed by the diverse team she and Zalavex assembled. Species that had once been considered too primitive for advanced tactical roles found their unique perspectives valued and their contributions recognized. The old guard of the Confederation military initially resisted these changes. Admiral Krivix and his supporters argued that centuries of tradition shouldn't be discarded because of one human's unorthodox approach. But when joint exercises demonstrated the superior efficiency of the new tactics, even the most stubborn traditionalists began to reconsider. During a ceremony marking the 2nd anniversary of the Innovation Command, Commander Pex presented Maya with the Order of Strategic Excellence, the highest academic honor in the Confederation. As she accepted the award, Maya caught Zalavic's eye in the audience. This honor belongs not just to me, but to everyone who had the courage to question established doctrine, she said. Especially Colonel Zalavx, who could have dismissed my ideas, but instead chose to advocate for a new approach. Later, during the reception, Zalavix found Maya standing alone on a balcony overlooking the academy grounds. Quite a speech, he said, joining her. Though you neglected to mention that I initially did dismiss your ideas. Maya smiled. We all start somewhere. What matters is where we end up. And where is that, exactly? Zalavix asked. The Confederation has functioned effectively for millennia. Now we're changing fundamental aspects of our approach based on the insights of a species that only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Change isn't always bad, Maya replied. Sometimes it's necessary for survival. She gestured toward the stars, visible through the transparent dome above them. The universe is vast, and we've explored only a tiny fraction of it. Who knows what other species we might encounter, what challenges we might face. Adaptability isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. Zalavex considered this. Your species evolved on a death world. Perhaps that explains your emphasis on adaptability. When your planet is constantly trying to kill you, you learn to think creatively. Maya agreed with a slight smile. But I think all sentient species share that capacity. Sometimes they just need permission to use it. Permission? Or encouragement. Structures and hierarchies are important for stability, but they can also stifle innovation. Your simulation was brilliant, Colonel, but it was designed to reward students who followed established doctrine, not those who found new solutions. Zalok's membranes fluttered in reluctant acknowledgement. A fair criticism, though I maintain that established doctrine exists for good reason. Of course it does, Maya nodded. I'm not suggesting we discard everything that came before, just that we remain open to new possibilities. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when a junior officer approached with an urgent message for Maya. Director Watson, we've received a transmission from the exploration vessel Horizon. They've encountered an unusual phenomenon in the Cygnus sector, some kind of spatial anomaly that's disrupting their navigation systems. Maya and Zalovex exchanged glances. Gravitational distortion? She asked. Unknown, ma'am, but the pattern of disruption is unlike anything in our databases. Tell them we're on our way, Maya replied. As the officer departed, she turned to Zalovs. Care to join me? This might be an opportunity to test some of our new theories in a practical situation. Zalovex found himself nodding without hesitation. I wouldn't miss it, though I hope you're not planning to create another gravitational resonance cascade. One was quite enough for my career. Maya laughed. No promises, but whatever we find, I'm certain it will be more interesting if we face it together. As they walked toward the command center, Zalovex reflected on how much had changed in just 2 years. From dismissing humans as primitive Deathworlders to willingly partnering with one to explore unknown phenomena. His perspective had shifted dramatically. Perhaps that was the most valuable lesson the human had taught him. The universe was full of surprises, and those who remained rigid in their thinking would eventually be left behind. True wisdom lay not in knowing all the answers, but in constantly seeking new questions. The Cygnus sector anomaly would prove to be just the first of many challenges they would face together. Each one would test their evolving tactical doctrines, push the boundaries of their understanding, and deepen the unlikely partnership between a human from a death world and a Threshian colonel who had once believed he had nothing left to learn. And far beyond the explored regions of space, forces unknown to the Confederation were stirring, forces that would test not just tactics and technology, but the very foundations of cooperation between diverse species. When that inevitable confrontation came, the innovations pioneered by Maya Watson and Colonel Zalovs would prove to be the Confederation's greatest asset. But that, as they say, is another story. In the Grand Lecture Hall of the Galactic Confederation Strategic Academy, a new class of students gathered for their first lesson in advanced fleet tactics. Among them sat representatives of 27 species, including, for the first time, 3 humans. At the center of the hall stood Director Maya Watson and Senior Advisor Zalovs, ready to begin a new teaching cycle. Today, Maya announced, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. We begin by questioning everything you think you know about tactical doctrine. Zalovex's mandibles clicked in what had become his characteristic expression of amusement. Your first assignment is simple. Find the flaw in my undefeated simulation. The students exchanged nervous glances. One of the humans raised a hand. But Director Watson already defeated that simulation. Isn't the flaw the gravitational resonance vulnerability? Maya and Zalovex shared a knowing look. That was just one solution, Maya replied. We've since discovered 17 other potential approaches, and we're certain there are more waiting to be found. Your task, Zalovs continued, is not to repeat what has been done, but to discover what has yet to be imagined. That is the true essence of tactical innovation. As the students began discussing the challenge, Maya moved to stand beside her colleague and friend. Do you think any of them will find a new solution? She asked quietly. I have no doubt, Zalovs replied. After all, if a single Deathworlder could change our understanding of tactics, imagine what a classroom full of diverse minds might accomplish. Together, they watched the future of the Confederation begin to take shape, A future where differences were not merely tolerated, but celebrated, where innovation flourished alongside tradition, and where the wisdom of the stars was available to all who were willing to listen. On that day, in that moment, the universe seemed full of infinite possibilities. And for Maya Watson, the quiet girl from a death world who had outsmarted an entire fleet, that was the greatest victory of all.